constructive dominant males are outlawed, the only thing you're going to get is destructive male dominance, right? That's the only thing you're going to get. And some of what you get is going to be gangbangers and the kinds of people that Trump is trying to deport. You're going to get that kind of thing. Or you're going to get effeminate, soft beta males who are destructively dominant. Their wimpiness dominates the home.
Doug, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, I've been a long-time fan. I've read some of your works, and I know you've got the Rampant series. I think you're on season 7 now, and to see some of the trailers that have come out for that, obviously you and I are very much aligned in having powerful conversations with men who are doing big things.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I want to lead this conversation off by asking you about generally what I see your work as is overcoming a softness in culture and society that seems to be running wild at this point. And I'm very curious when it comes to masculinity and manliness, do you think that this is just a byproduct of modern times, or do you feel like there's a clear and deliberate assault or attack, if you will, against manliness and masculinity?
Well, I think both are the case. And I wouldn't say modern times. I would say wealthy times. This is something that always happens when a society grows wealthy, when they grow rich. It is easier to be lazy than to be hard, or to work hard. And when you have an abundance of resources, as it says in the book of Deuteronomy, Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. So what happens is in order to be a pioneer, if you're settling the West, or you're out there with your wife in a log cabin and a cow, you've got to work like a dog all through the summer and fall in order to survive the winter. Right? You've got to be hard in order to live. And once a society has become prosperous, it is easy to become unfaithful, and that unfaithfulness doesn't have immediate dire consequences. Right? There are dire consequences, but they're on a long fuse. So the Puritan Cotton Mather once said that faithfulness begat prosperity, and the daughter devoured the mother. Right? So faithfulness, hard work, doing it right creates wealth. And then wealth devours the mother. Jeshurun waxes fat and kicked. And that's warned against also in Deuteronomy 8. When you come into the land and you have all these blessings, these houses that you didn't build, and the wells you didn't dig, and the orchards you didn't plant, then you're going to forget the Lord your God. And once you forget the Lord your God, you give yourself over to self-indulgence, and that self-indulgence generates softness. Now, that's one thing. The other side of it, you asked about us being manipulated in this direction. Softness creates an opportunity for the manipulators. They can an enervated population, a soft population, is much more easily manipulated than independent thinkers who make their own way and pay their own way.
Yeah, so I imagine then if we're living in this wealthy and this soft world, then there's those bad actors who are then saying there's an opportunity to exploit, to amass power, wealth, abundance, and prosperity on the backs of other people.
Right. There's still some hard people around, but they're hard and cruel. Okay? They're hard and cruel, and they take every opportunity they can get to squeeze people dry.
So as you're saying that, then what comes to mind, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, are you advocating then that we as men learn how to be not only righteous, but also hard at the same time? Because I think you do need both.
That is correct. The only answer to hard and cruel men is hard and godly men. That's the only answer. In the gun control debate, the answer to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Right? You can't.
Well, I think the answer that maybe, and I don't agree with this, by the way, but I think the counter argument to that is nobody with guns.
Right. Yeah. And then that is refuted by the bumper sticker, which is when guns are outlawed, only outlaws have guns. Right.
Great point.
When you disarm the populace, the only people you disarm are the law-abiding ones. Right. So you have good men, bad men. They all have guns. And then the magistrate says, okay, everybody, turn in your guns. Well, who might do that? Right. Not the outlaws, not the criminals. All the bank robbers don't get together and say, oh, man, did you see what the governor just said? We better turn in our guns, and we're going to have to use our fingers in our pockets for the next heist. The outlaws don't do that. And so consequently, you have to have the kind of men who think things through. And so when the authorities make their official pronouncement, we have determined thus and such, and it's a silly, manifestly silly proposal, men who think for themselves and who know that they have a responsibility to protect their families, period, are going to say that's nonsense. So you should remember when you're in a dire situation, some intruder has broken into your house, and every second counts. Remember that the police are minutes away.
Yeah,
but every second counts.
Sure, yeah, and your training and proficiency and your willingness to do what needs to be done. I think as you're talking about this, it comes to mind the hard times create strong men create good times. You've heard that, I'm sure.
Yes.
And now you're talking about the same principle, but now we're talking about it thousands of years old. I'm sure these concepts are as old as man himself, that it's the hard times that create strength in people, because to your point, we have to rise and overcome it. What is the alternative? To slither away and die? Well, maybe most people will do that, but a large percentage of people are not willing to do that. When
we are confronted with tumult, and we do live in tumultuous times, the call for Christian men should be to rise up and meet the occasion. God didn't put you weren't born in this generation by accident. You were put here by God for a purpose, and that purpose is not to be craven or cowardly. That purpose is to stand up, grow a backbone, and whatever the threat is, the man of the house needs to step in between that threat and his people. All right, so
go ahead.
If there's any distance at all between the intruder, the threat, the cruel one, and your wife and your children, the man of the house is the one who needs to step in between. He needs to be the shield. He needs to be the fortress. He needs to be the wall. And that's the charge that God gives to Adam in the garden. He gives him the garden, and Adam's charge was to tend and protect, basically. He was to be the guardian of the garden, and he was to tend the garden. And every man who has a family has a garden, and you are to tend it, you are to take care of it, provide for it, provide and protect. That's our aboriginal, that's our primeval charge. That's what men are for.
When you talk about Christian men rising up, I think I don't know if it's a growing sentiment, but there seems to be a pervasive sentiment that Christianity and men, I would say maybe weakness even, are synonymous in a way, it seems like, in modern times. I'm not saying that it should be that way. I'm saying that in many ways it's perceived that way. There seems to be a weakness in men, a softness that I don't think Christianity calls for, but I'm wondering if it gets misinterpreted and then we find a bunch of weak men who aren't willing to be bold and courageous and step up in the way they're commanded to.
Right. There's a very interesting historical reason for this that's outlined by a gentleman named Leon Podlus in a magnificent book called The Church Impotent. The Church Impotent. And this goes back to Bernard of Clairvaux, a medieval churchman. And what he did was initially innocent, but it had long-term consequences. One of the things that the average Bible reader will soon recognize is that the church is described in Scripture in feminine terms. The church is the mother of us all in Galatians. The church is the bride of Christ
bride of Christ, right.
in Ephesians 5. Now, that works when you are understanding the church as a corporate entity, the whole thing, right? So when the congregation assembles, it makes sense to think of the church as the bride and Christ as the bridegroom. That is fully scriptural. What Bernard of Clairvaux did in his devotional works was he individualized it. So there's a difference between corporate worship and your individual quiet time, your individual personal devotions. And what Bernard of Clairvaux attempted to do was to take that corporate reality and individualize it. Well, the problem is, if you're a single man, a solitary man, having your devotions, and you're trying to compose yourself for your devotions as a bride preparing for her wedding, one of two things is going to be the case. Either you're going to be no good at it, right? It's just alien to you. You don't know how to think. And so consequently, if you think that that's what piety is, then you give up. You give up on it. Or you reject it, you walk away from the church. Or the other problem is a man composes himself that way, and he finds that he is good at it, which is effeminate. Or, he's starting to look pretty gay, okay? So what happened was, as a result of this devotional tradition descending from Bernard of Clairvaux in the West, it became the case, it developed that the church became something for women and children. Okay, men in their masculinity found themselves increasingly not welcome. Okay, everything, the music became soupier and soupier. The preaching became more and more emotional. Sentimentally driven, which is what a lot of Victorian Christianity did. It became kittens and flowers and bouquets, and men just didn't. Yeah, good grief, who needs this? But this is not a function of religion per se. Now, I'm a thoroughgoing Protestant. I'm not saying anything about truth claims here, but religion in the world, Islam is masculine, Judaism is masculine, Eastern Orthodoxy is masculine, but the Western Church, Roman Catholic and Protestantism, have all been greatly affected by this devotional tradition that individualized a response of the creature to God that had to act or speak or think in feminine terms. And we need to recover a corporate sense for the church where the Bible requires that the feminine church, the bride, be led by men only. Okay, and this is why it's when you see this egalitarian move in many evangelical or quasi-evangelical churches to have women up front or women preachers, what you're doing is you're bringing disaster upon disaster. The problem was that we were already too feminine in our posture and demeanor, and now they're making it more so. And there's just no way for the church to recover the tough-mindedness and then the actual physical toughness that is necessary to go through a time of hostility and persecution and so on. So we have to read our Bibles again. We have to read our history books. We have to study how this came about and just unapologetically say that the church, in order to recover the masculine posture that we need in our culture, the church needs to become an obedient bride. And as an obedient bride, we have to do what the Bible says, right? And here's the irony. The church is most feminine when her leadership is restricted to men only, because that's what the Bible says to do. We're being a submissive church. We're doing what Jesus says. When women lead in worship, we are being an uppity wife. We're being an uppity bride. The Church of Christ becomes bridezilla.
I'm wondering why this concept of corporatism, like you're talking about, would inherently make it more masculine. Is it because it's no longer, no longer subjective, and more objective towards the word of God through the Bible, versus making it more individualized is more relative, right? And people begin to interpret what works for them based on their level of happiness, for example.
Correct. Men tend to be more analytic. And of course, I realize I'm not sure what state you're in, but what I'm about to say might be illegal. Men tend to be more analytical. They're more logocentric. They're more word-oriented. Women are more intuitive. They're more relational in their dealings. They're more emotionally attuned. And if you have feminine leadership, you're going to get more of that. If you have male leadership, which is what the Bible requires, if you have male leadership in the church, and furthermore, the males who are doing it are not males who are trying to act like women. Okay, so what has happened is this. Under the influence of all these historical forces, let's say you have a sweet little boy growing up in the church who loves Jesus, and he is a sweet little boy, kind of bookish, and his whole life, the old ladies of the church have been pinching his cheeks and telling him he ought to think about seminary. He's such a godly little boy. So what happens is he grows up and he goes into the ministry, and so you have the pulpit filled with a bunch of beta males whose idea of what a successful relational pastor is shaped by women. Okay? Now, no matter how you do it, men, even beta men, are not going to be good at it. When all is said and done, they're still a guy. And somebody's going to come along and say, if all the things we value in our leadership are things like sensitivity and attuned to people's feelings, and as opposed to a masculine approach, which is I want a man to get up into the pulpit and I want him to tell me what the Bible says as though I or he had never been born. What does the Bible say? All right, that's sort of an objective declaration. That's a masculine vocation. Men are good at that. Okay, when they learn how to do it, men are good at that kind of thing. And when they try to relate to everybody and are sensitive to everybody, they're just not good at it. And then someone's going to say, well, man, if we value all this sentimentality and sensitivity, why don't we call in the people who are good at it? And so the pressure is on to call women pastors. Why? The reason we're struggling with women pastors in the church today is because we've been trying to have men be women pastors for a number of decades now, and the women are finally saying, "Oh, come on, let us do it." And I would say, no, we've been trying to do the wrong thing. We've been trying to accomplish the wrong thing. We live in such perilous times that the pulpit is a place that ought to take high courage to occupy. Right? If it doesn't take courage to get into the pulpit and declare the word of God to a wicked and perverse generation, what good is it?
Yeah. I was having a conversation with somebody very close to me just the other day, and what she had said is that we've created this society, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the society where we're trying to make women little men and men big women. And maybe another way of saying that is men are going to make inferior women the same way women are going to make inferior men. But this egalitarianism, like you're talking about, doesn't really honor or recognize the traditional roles based on biological makeup, and it makes everybody worse.
Right.
Instead of making everybody better, which is what they state as the goal.
Why on earth would you want to take a first-rate woman and turn her into a third-rate man?
Right. Right.
Where's the upside on that? No.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So how do we then as men reclaim the narrative? And I'm not just talking about in the church, because I think you're right. I think I saw a statistic or something that Eastern Orthodoxy is the largest growing religion or denomination for young men. And I think it's precisely because what you're saying is men are attracted to direction, discipline, boldness, clarity, conviction. And I think that's what that church represents largely. Yeah. But how do we as men reclaim it, not only in the church, but culturally as well?
Yeah, so the thing that is attractive about Eastern Orthodoxy to young men is precisely this. The adherents of it, particularly the leadership, they all wake up in the morning knowing what they think. Right? They don't need to put a finger in the wind to determine what we're going to say today. And now, I'm a Protestant. I don't agree with Eastern Orthodoxy, but Eastern Orthodoxy, avowed and declared as though it were the truth, is going to be more attractive to many men than some murmured, whispered Protestantism that might be technically correct. We need Protestant leaders, we need Christian leaders, we need pastors who are also willing to get up in the morning already knowing what they think, without having taken a survey, without having taken a poll. They know what they think because they read their Bibles.
Well, and I would also say, and without consulting others. And I'm not saying that we should not be open in certain contexts to feedback and ideas, but too often it seems like to me that we as men will make decisions based on how other people will respond, not based on principle and what we believe.
Correct. So there's a difference. So this is another feature of our effeminate age and the effeminate church. A biblical preacher is someone who is going to preach for decision. He wants to present the objective truth to the listener and call for him to decide. Do you want to follow Christ or not? Do you want to submit to this doctrinal teaching or not? He's calling for a decision. The modern way is to preach for consensus. They're not preaching for decision. They're preaching for consensus. And because they're preaching for consensus, inevitably it deteriorates to a lowest common denominator affair. All right, what can we all agree on, after which we will give each other the group hug? Well, the group hug is not what we should be after. What we should be after is the truth at all costs. By all means, speak the truth in love. By all means, be as kind as you can be when you proclaim the truth. But whatever you do, proclaim the truth.
I'm reminded, I can't remember the phenomenon, but when you talked about the lowest common denominator, a silly example I once heard is going to a family or neighborhood barbecue, and everybody wants to cook some burgers or hot dogs or steaks or whatever it might be, but then there's one vegan in the group. And because they don't want to be a hassle, the host doesn't want to put that vegan out of the way or whatever it might be, then they change the entire meal, and all of a sudden you're not cooking hamburgers and hot dogs, you're cooking tofu patties and grilling cauliflower on the grill to pander to the one person who decides they want to, in this case, ruin it for everybody.
That's exactly the problem, because preaching for consensus, striving for consensus that way means that those who believe the most must give way to those who believe the least.
How does a man practice boldness and assertiveness? Because there is this is the reality. So many men, grown men, have grown up with, for example, single mothers, being raised by single mothers, but also being in schools and being primarily taught by women. And so there tends to be more of an effeminate learning going on in their formative years. How does a man who wants to step up and be more bold and courageous and assertive begin to do that? And how does he do that in practice?
That's a great question. I think you put your finger on a real sore spot in our generation. The Bible teaches that one of the fundamental ways that we learn is by imitation. And I had a wonderful father, and I can't begin to recount all the ways in which I learned things that I can't remember how I learned them, that are down in my bones because I saw my dad when I was 5 or when I was 7. And I remember certain memorable lessons that I learned from him, but I'm sure it was a constant, nonstop affair, right? I was just watching my dad. The Bible, Ephesians 5:1 says, "Therefore, as dearly loved children, be imitators of God." Children are imitators. Okay, Paul tells the Corinthians to imitate him as he imitates Christ. So our principal way of learning these things is by imitation. Now, some of your viewers, and perhaps a lot of them, are in precisely the position that you described. They grew up with a single mom. She was a single mom. Dad.
I was personally too.
Yeah.
My mom, bless her heart, raised me primarily on her own. So
right.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, Dad was long gone, and so what do you do? Well, my father grew up in an intact home. He had a mom and a dad, but he became a Christian at the Naval Academy. So he became a Christian after he was an adult. And how do I do this? I don't know. How do I be a Christian man? Because he was the first one in his family to call on Christ, and he was away from home. He'd already left home when he did that. And what he did was he began reading biographies. So there are, and particularly missionary biographies in his case, there are many wonderful examples of stalwart Christian men down through the history of the church. We've got 2,000 years of martyrs, witnesses, preachers, missionaries, and many wonderful biographies have been written of them. So my dad said, I don't know how to be a Christian man, and I've not grown up around Christian men, so I'm going to start reading biographies, missionary biographies. And whatever it was he did was really something, because by the time I swam into consciousness, by the time I was aware of my surroundings, my dad was the epitome of what a Christian man ought to be. And he would have told you, man, I didn't have that background. I didn't have that growing up. I didn't know. Well, what you don't know, you can resolve to come to know, right? And a biography is not quite as good as growing up with a solid dad in the home. It's not quite as good, but it's way, way better than nothing.
Yeah, when you were saying that, it also reminded me of one of the quotes that I love is, and I think it's in Future Men: "If boys don't learn, men won't know."
Yeah.
And I'm confronted with so many men who say to themselves, I didn't have a dad when I was growing up. How do I now become a man? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, well, you are in a position where you can be a clean slate and you can learn the things that you wish you would have learned when you were a kid.
That's
and
right.
The only difference now is that you actually have control over it. But you know what is also interesting to me is the women that I know who are single mothers personally, and many of the women who might listen to this podcast as well, I think culture and society might make you believe that they don't want this, but I've found the opposite to be true. I've found that the majority of single mothers actually want this for their boys. They want their boys to be around good and strong and righteous, bold men. They know that they can't do it entirely on their own, and they wrestle mentally and emotionally with the idea that they need to figure out a way to help their boys become men.
Right. Now, I should insert something. I think you're exactly right, but I'll assert another variable in this. And this is the case if you've got a single mom at church and she's wanting her boy to play ball with the other boys who have dads around, and she wants her boy to see what godly masculinity looks like. That's very much a good instinct, and it's very often the case. But let's say you've got a typical married couple and they start having kids and they both grew up in this sort of quasi-soft culture of ours. There are going to be two things going on. She, the mom, is going to have a deep creational need for her husband to be a man's man. She has a deep creational need for him to wear the pants, for him to be hard for the family, to be a protector, and so on. She has a creational need for that. But women, just like men, are part of a fallen race. They are sinners too, right? And one of the things that we learn from Genesis 3, when the curse is pronounced on the woman, it says, your desire shall be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Okay? That's in Genesis 3. The only time that Hebrew construction occurs elsewhere in the Bible is in the next chapter when a curse is being pronounced on Cain. Or not the curse, but when a warning is being given to Cain. Sin is crouching at the door. Its desires for you, but you must master it. It's the same construction. So a woman has a desire for mastery over her husband, which sets up tension and competition and the temptation to be unsubmissive and so on. So a godly woman, a woman who wants to walk with God, needs to be aware of these two elements in her being. There's the creational element that wants her husband to be firm, wants her husband to lead, wants her husband to act like he's the head. And then there's an element in her that wants him to lead the way she thinks he ought to go.
Right.
I want you to lead, but make sure you do it right.
But do it this way. Yeah.
I want you to lead. I want you to be the leader, but make sure you do it the according to the plan I have in mind. And this sets up a tension and sometimes bumps and scrapes between the husband and the wife. But it translates into how you bring up boys. How high should a dad throw his toddler in the air? Okay, how high should he do that? Well, not as high as he wants to, but higher than she wants.
Sure, right? That's fair. Yeah,
higher than she wants. How high up the tree does dad let his 10-year-old boy climb? The answer is higher than mom wants. Okay, higher than mom wants, and perhaps a little less up there than the boy wants. Right? You don't want to spend all your time going to the ER, but there is such a thing as crazy reckless that dads have to teach their boys to be prudential as well as risk takers. So if you wrap your boys in bubble wrap so that nobody, if they're 12 years old and they're still sitting in a car seat with a bike helmet on, something has gone desperately, terribly wrong. And what you're doing is you're inflicting wounds on that boy that won't bleed until he's grown.
Well, I would agree with you, and it's interesting. That word choice is interesting because most people would say and actually believe that they're doing it to keep from inflicting harm upon their children, to keep them safe, but they're actually creating the opposite, not in a physical sense necessarily, at least now, but a mental and emotional sense, specifically down the road.
Yeah, they're creating a void. They're creating an ache and emptiness in that child that they don't know what they're for. God made men to take risks, right? We're supposed to be risk takers. Now, we're not supposed to be crazy nuts in our risk taking. There's a recklessness that would also be sinful, but nothing was ever accomplished by men who refuse to take risks. Who's going to explore? Who's going to find new lands? Who's going to hunt? Who's going to fight the wars? There is no way to make this, to wish into existence a cozy, safe nest, right? Trotsky once said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. We live in a dangerous world, And that dangerous world has to be reckoned with. We can't wish it away. And the wife may earnestly wish that her husband not have to go to war, not have to go out to defend the family, not have to risk anything in order. But there's one thing worse than having a husband, losing a husband in defense of his family. And that's having a husband who won't do it. Right?
Yeah, well, and obviously also the inherent dangers that come with that. You know, I know of people who, for example, the wife will say, "Well, I don't want you, husband, to have a gun in the house." And to me, I'm thinking, you know, first there needs to be some education, and then there needs to be an executive decision. You don't want him to have a gun in the house until an intruder breaks in and he's willing to take care of the threat. And then I imagine you really wouldn't complain much about it.
That is absolutely correct. And the things that you want to do is say, look, hon, here are some basic prudential measures that I'm willing to have a gun safe, right? I'm willing to do. I don't want to leave a loaded gun on the coffee table for our 3-year-old boy to find. Yeah, I'm with you on that. But the world is a hard and cruel place, and men have to act in accordance with that.
I think to go back to the way that we started this conversation with the relative softness of society and the abundance, you know, yes, we do live in a harsh world, but we also live in a very abundant, prosperous world. Access to medical care and access to creature comforts and technology and all of these things have, I think the argument is, and I don't know that I'm saying this right, but that it has rendered risk less necessary. You know, there's not as much risk for me to be in a physical altercation or have to fight for my life like there may have been 500 years ago.
That's exactly
the
right.
saber-toothed tiger is not going to eat me, so I'm safe there. Even financial risk is lower than it's ever been. You know, we have Social Security and disability benefits and unemployment benefits and welfare provisions where, hey, if I lose my job, I'm going to be okay. Like, I'm going to be taken care of, and that risk is mitigated in some way. I think that's why people are maybe less inclined to take the risks that they otherwise would, maybe even a century ago.
Right. Well, it actually divides up because we are a pampered and coddled generation. All right? Other people from other ages looking at the things we have: refrigeration, hot and cold running water, antibiotics. You know, all these things. If you've got a 1998 Toyota Camry, Nebuchadnezzar would give up half of his kingdom to have one of those. Right? Right. And we are unimaginably wealthy, and we are pampered, and so consequently, it's possible for people to coast and survive without ever learning how to take risks. Or and that is to their detriment, because what's happening is they're forfeiting a crucial element in character formation. But then there are others who, and this is quite striking to me, where a lot of extreme sports have developed as a reaction, demonstrating that we have a basic need to take risks. So when you see somebody rock climbing or extreme mountain biking, or some of the crazy things that people do with parasailing, and some of these extreme sports are testament to the fact that God doesn't want us to spend our lives sitting on the sofa watching a Netflix series. That's not how we're supposed to spend our lives.
I imagine too, I would say this probably more about boys than girls, that they're at some point, if they're not allowed to risk and take these not reckless risks, but prudent risks, that they will then eventually rebel because it's so innate in them, and they'll rebel, and end up doing something that maybe is reckless unless they're given somewhat of a lead or rope to be able to enjoy within certain parameters. For example, with my kids, I want them to take risks. I don't want them to die, but I would like them to take risks. And it's my job to figure out where that line is of safety versus risk-taking, adventure, learning. Like you said, I hadn't thought about that, but character development is another big one that comes with taking those risks as well.
Yeah, you want physical safety, but you also want emotional safety throughout the rest of their life, emotional security. And you reminded me of my son and my grandson, my son's family, a number of years ago, lived downtown Moscow, and they were a block away from the hospital. And they were hanging around in the living room, and my grandson was jumping off of the couch and got up on the arm of the couch and was jumping off the couch. And my son was there. And my grandson said for my next trick, he wanted to do a flip. he wanted to do a flip off of the couch. And my son said, "No, I don't. Let's not do that." And well, I really want to, but let's not do that. You might get hurt. And my grandson said, "But the hospital's right there."
That's funny.
Yeah. So that's the spirit you want. Even when you tap on the brakes, which a good and godly father will tap on the brakes, there's no way to make the learning of taking risks comfortable. The whole point of it is to be uncomfortable. And the whole point is to learn where that zone is, where that sweet spot is, where you're stretched beyond what you thought you could do, but you're not stretched so far that you're out of your mind.
Why do you think, well, first let me ask you this. Do you believe that at some point, whether it's a moment or gradually over time, dies in men? And if that's the case, why does it die in men? Why does that happen? Because I think we do become more docile, more obedient, more civil, less risk-taking. Is it just hormonal and biological, or is there something else at play here?
No, I think there are biological shifts that take place. The softness in men is not just a psychological softness. It becomes a physical thing. It becomes an emotional thing. And then you've got the additional factor of drugs, where in the government schools, they don't know how to discipline boys. And so consequently, they diagnose them as having ADHD and
ADHD,
all the things. And the school has a sign outside that says drug-free zone, which we ought to say, yeah, right. Drug-free zone unless administered by the school nurse, which is happening to a third of your boys, or whatever it is. So what we do is we hit boys on the head with a chemical rock in order to keep them docile. Because teaching junior high boys, for example, can be like trying to train orangutans. It's
nightmarish.
It's a real thing. But we've been doing this for thousands of years. It's not like we don't know how. It's that in our soft generation, we've given up, and we'd rather take the easy way out. Rather than disciplining boys and teaching them what their toughness is for, what their angsty activity is for, instead of directing it in a profitable direction, we have decided to render it inert. Okay, so another way of coming at this is that I think that it is this is an inescapable concept. In every society, everywhere, men are dominant. Okay, men will be dominant. You can't make them not dominant. You can't pass a law that makes men not dominant. Feminism.
Right. I mean, you can't legislate biology.
You can't legislate it, right. Feminism is like trying to have Congress decree that triangles will have four sides. It's not going to happen. But this is a fallen world, and it's possible for men to be dominant in a constructive way, and it's possible for men to be dominant in a destructive way. Okay?
Sure.
But they're going to be dominant somehow, some way. And what feminism has done is that it has outlawed constructive dominance. Right? You may not have constructive dominance. You may not have dominance within the law. So it goes back to the principle, when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. When constructive dominant males are outlawed, the only thing you're going to get is destructive male dominance, right? That's the only thing you're going to get. And some of what you get is going to be gangbangers and the kinds of people that Trump is trying to deport. You're going to get that kind of thing. Or you're going to get effeminate, soft beta males who are destructively dominant. Their wimpiness dominates the home, right? Their abdication dominates. If the husband just ups and runs away, deserts his family, that empty chair at the dinner table dominates, right?
That's present. That's palpable.
Right. So consequently, you can't pass a law that says men will no longer have an important role. Back in the 70s, the feminists had a saying that said, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Well, it turns out that that's not true, right? Women need men, daughters need men, sons need men. And our society has chased men away, pelting them with rocks, calling them names. And now you're starting to see think pieces appear. Where have all the men gone? Where are all the good?
Right.
Where are
you
all
said
the
you
good?
didn't want us.
Yeah. Please come back. Please come back. Well, nothing doing. Just nothing doing. Here's another way of. I don't think they're going to come back apart from a radical cultural repentance. Okay, so here's another way of looking at male-female dynamics and all of this. And this is something I learned from George Gilder and his book, Men and Marriage. But given the fact of male dominance, you have to also take into account the difference between a man's sexual cycle and a woman's sexual cycle. A man's sexual cycle goes from arousal to climax. A woman's sexual cycle goes from arousal to when the kid graduates from college. Mm-hmm. Okay? She has a long-term nesting sexual cycle, sure. and for her, it's all relational, all sexual. The whole thing ties together. Now, those are two very different sexual cycles, and I'm talking about selfish, and I'm not talking about people who are submitted to the scriptures. I'm just talking about the way men think, the way women think, independent of scriptural instruction, okay? Not because I want us to live that way, but because I want the scriptural instruction to actually deal with men as they are and women as they are, right? So if you have a society where the women subordinate their sexual cycle to the men's, what you have is a boatload of Vikings. What you have is a motorcycle gang, right? The boatload of Vikings give themselves over to the dominant male characteristic of rape and pillage. On to the next village.
Left unchecked, you're saying.
What's that?
Left unchecked by their female counterparts.
That's right, because the woman's sexual cycle is subordinated to theirs. Women are always available down the road. Just do what you want to do. So what you have is a freebooting, piratical lifestyle. When it goes the other way, when men subordinate their sexual cycle to the woman's, what you have is civilization, towns, cities, great accomplishment. All of a sudden, civilization happens. But here's the thing: what would induce men to give up their life of freebooting piracy in order to come settle down, commit themselves to one woman, and be a farmer? Right.
Sexual opportunity.
It's sexual opportunity and predictability, but there's sexual opportunity in the piratical lifestyle too. It's just more risky and that sort of thing. So I'm postulating an imaginary deal was struck. Look, men, if you come and settle down, commit yourself to one woman, take care of her and take care of your offspring, if you do that, the end result of which is civilization, we will let you be in charge.
Interesting.
Okay. You can be the head of the home. We will honor and respect you as the head of the home. You can be leaders and shakers and movers that we want in order to induce you to be here and stay. We understand that it's going to have to be patriarchal. Okay, it's going to have to be patriarchal. Now, what feminism did was that it outlawed any expression of patriarchy. You can't even talk that way, right? If you're the CEO of a major corporation, you could be a millionaire and the CEO at the top of your game. If you say something like, I think women should be at home making biscuits, something outrageous like that, your career is over, right? That sort of thing is policed, and it's policed vigorously, which means that feminists welshed on the deal. Okay, they welshed on the deal, and we started to get the pirates showing up again. We've got crime-ridden inner cities. What's happening there? The men are going back to the lifestyle of Vikings. Why wouldn't they? Right now, of course,
that's interesting.
Of course, we would say as Christians, I don't want ultimately men subordinating their sexual cycle to the woman's or the other way. I want them both to subordinate their sexual cycles to the authority of Christ, right? But what Christ tells us is that the husband is the head of his wife. The family is a patriarchal unit, and it cannot be healthy otherwise, right? There's no way to have a well-ordered home where mom is doing it alone, or mom is wearing the pants and dictating to her husband the way it's going to go. There's simply no way to have that turn out in a way that's not ugly.
When you're talking about you imagine this deal that was struck. I don't think you're saying it's a cultural deal. You're saying it's a biological deal that was struck, correct?
Yes,
or did
correct.
I misunderstand?
Yeah, no, you're understanding me correctly. This is when you're not in the grip of an ideology like feminism, this is a deal that everybody understands in their bones. Everybody just everybody just gets it, right? And they're going to continue. They're going to just get it instinctively. They're going to know. Of course, we want the men around, and of course, the men are going to want to be men, and the women want the men to be men, and all that natural revelation that we have in our bones, in our creational being, is then reinforced when the people believe in Christ and they start reading their Bibles, and they say, "Oh, yeah, it's here too." You know, this is God's pattern. This is God's plan. God established Adam and Eve in the garden, and Adam was the protector and the provider. And then all the way through the Old Testament and down through the New, you have male responsibility and male leadership. And then you have the Apostle Paul insisting on it. He doesn't permit a woman to teach or have authority over men in the church. It's just very, very clear. It's clear through natural revelation, and it's clear through special revelation that we need a patriarchal society in order to bless the women, right? Because
I'm glad you said that, because that is the point I think that a lot of people get wrong when they start to have a pessimistic view of the things that you're sharing now. I don't think they understand what you just said, that righteous men, which I try to be, have a innate desire to serve women. That is right. Protect, provide, preside. That's service. It's not at their expense. It's at their benefit.
Right. There's a difference. The way I put it this is there's a difference between a man being hard for the woman and a man being hard on the woman, right? His hardship, his toughness is to be a gift to her. Right? So when she sees her husband's toughness, it should make her feel warm all over. Right? It says, and actually in Ephesians 5, it says a husband is to nourish and cherish his wife. And one of the words there is thalpo. The Greek word is to keep warm. Right? A woman is to be fed and protected. She should feel secured But in this world, the only way she can feel secure is if he is tough, right? So, before before they're married, and they're at an event, and they're engaged, and he says, "I need to walk you to your car," right? It's after dark. I'm not going. You can't go out there alone. I'm going to walk you to your car, even if the crime rate is low. That's a good thing to do, right? Because what he's doing is he's signaling to her that I intend to love you as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for it. Right? So if the two of them
you're
are
worthy of protecting too. This is a woman
right.
that's worthy of being protected.
That's right. He's placing a value on her, and that's the sort of thing. When men start abdicating, when men run away, when men abandon their post, it's the women that get it in the teeth. The women are the ones who are really worked over by this.
It's so interesting. I had an author on. His name's Orion Taraban. He wrote a book called The Value of Others, and one of the assertions that he makes is that women are the gatekeepers of sexual opportunity and men are the gatekeepers of commitment. Mm-hmm. And as I was thinking about what he said and what you've said, there's a lot of alignment in that. You talk about her sexual cycle, that is gatekeeping sexual opportunity.
That's exactly right.
The men being the gatekeeper of commitment means, hey, I'm willing to protect you. I'm willing to provide for you. I'm willing to lead. I'm willing to be tough and hard and take on all the, what's the quote? The real man gains renown by standing between his family and destruction, absorbing the blows of fate with equanimity. I'm willing to do that, but I need to know that there's commitment here, that you're worth being the kind of person that I want to do that for.
And what you just quoted there reminds me of my definition of masculinity. Masculinity is the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. Right? That's what it is.
Say that again.
Masculinity is the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. I think that aligns perfectly with what you just quoted, and with men as the gatekeepers of commitment, women as the gatekeepers of sexual opportunity. That all aligns. Those things map onto each other perfectly.
Yeah. Well, I know you've got your new, we're going to shift gears here a little bit. I want to give the opportunity to tell these guys a little bit more about the work that you're doing. You have the Man Rampant series. I think you're on season 7, if I remember correctly. And you've got a lot of other work, including multiple books that I've read personally. Will you let the guys know where to find out about Man Rampant, and then also any other information they want to hear about you?
Sure. The best, we've got sort of a one-stop place, and that would be my blog. So Blog and Mayblog is the name of it, and the address is dougwills.com. So if you go to dougwills.com, on the front page there, if you just open up the front page, there's a portal to pretty much everything I'm involved with. New St. Andrews College, Logos School, ACCS, Canon Press Plus is where the Man Rampant series is housed. And so all the stuff that I do is pretty much there.
Great. Well, we'll sync everything up. I'm honored to be able to have this conversation. I've been following your work for a long time. I've read some of your works, and to be able to have this conversation means a lot to me. And I hope it serves the guys. I know it will. I really believe that the work that you're doing to call men up to be strong and righteous and bold and courageous is something that definitely we need more of. So I appreciate what you do for work and how you're impacting culture.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Thank you.